So back to the Spey cast. Now, when we do this, there's different types of casts. There's what's called an aerialized anchor cast, and there's what's called a sustained anchor cast. This is an aerialized anchor cast where the anchor, when I sweep back, my anchor and D-loop are formed at the same time. On this cast, when that anchor hits, I have to go forward. I already have a D-loop. I'm forced to go forward. Whereas if I do a sustained anchor cast, I set the anchor first, I can hesitate for a second. Then I form my D-loop and I make my cast. Okay? And it's good to understand both these casts, and it's good to learn all of these casts, sustained anchor cast and aerialized anchor cast. I like using aerialized anchor cast for floating line, lighter sink tips, and smaller flies. If I get into really heavy sink tips and bigger flies, a lot of times the sustained anchor cast is easier because getting that, when you get that line set into your anchor, it gets the tip up out of the water and the big fly out of the water. Whereas with an aerialized anchor cast, if I had a heavy tip on and a big fly, it's very hard to get that fly up out of the water. So it's much easier with a sustained anchor cast. So I'm going to start with this switch cast, and I'm going to run through how to develop a good switch cast. The first thing you need on a good switch cast is a good lift. This is something that I see go wrong a lot for people, and most casts go wrong in the first 10% of the cast. And in this cast, it's the lift. So when you do a lift, it is simply that. It is a lift, and I like to lift it almost like a shotgun, both hands at the same time. If I keep my bottom hand low and just lift my top hand, I get a very steep angle in the rod. I don't like that for loading the rod. The rod loads best when it is parallel to the water. If I'm going to load this rod, if it's parallel to the water, I can flex it. See how that rod flexes there? I can flex the rod much better and bend the rod. If that rod's steep like this, it's a lot more awkward to try and bend the rod. Plus, you can see my D-loop all hit the water at the same time, which we'll get into. So, we're doing this lift. We're both hands here. We're lifting straight up. It's that simple. There's no acceleration here. I don't want to lift fast. Big mistake is a fast lift and then sweep, and what that does is it makes my anchor crash. The lift is very gentle. You just want to lift the line out of the water somewhat. If I hesitate here, the line will sag back. Now with a short belly like this, I can get away with pausing here and then making my cast. But if I had a longer belly, it's more important that I lift and continue back. So you don't want any hesitation if you got a long belly, ideally. Lift and sweep. So that's the lift, and you're going to lift above your head maybe a foot or so. It depends how deep you are. If I was deeper in the water, I would lift a little higher. It's actually the same height off the water, but relative to me, it's higher. Okay, the lift is going to be here to make that cast if I was in deeper water. So the lift is here. From here, we're going to sweep back. This rod tip has to come down when I do this sweep to form my D-loop. If the rod tip stays at that height, what ends up happening is my D-loop gets flat. You see how the D-loop all hit the water at the same time? You can't get the back of the D-loop aerialized to drive it out. The rod, you see the height of the rod tip right now? This rod tip needs to do this. It needs to come down immediately. So right from there, it's coming down. Right from there, it's coming down and through there. And I just went too slow to get it back, but there, right there, has to come down. If the rod tip stays up, again, I'm going to get a flat D-loop. It's all going to hit the water at the same time. The key to this, and this is, I think, the biggest key in casting, is accelerate. You have to accelerate the rod tip. So when I get to the top of my lift and I go to do my sweep, anytime you do a stroke, you have to commit to it. And what I mean by that is, once you start going, you have to keep the rod moving. If I start and I hesitate a little bit, I'm not going to get the line really to do what I want. Now granted, this is a short belly, it kind of did, but you get into a longer belly, that'll never work. It's very important when you start your stroke, you commit to it. Keep it moving. Lift, sweep. There's no hesitation, and you can see the rod tip is gaining speed through the stroke. If I start fast and end slow, the line, you see how I left the line further down? And here's a good demonstration of that. See how fast I went? The line didn't go anywhere. It's simply because I started fast, and by starting fast, what I'm doing is I'm loading the rod early, and as I slow down, what's happening is the fly line is catching up to the rod. So by the time I stop the rod, there's no bend in the rod, and the line just simply stays where it was, or barely moves at all. Now watch the difference, and I'll just do a simple overhead cast. Look how slow I go, yet how the line just absolutely flew back. And it's simple acceleration. You have to accelerate the rod tip. So when I do this sweep, I have to just focus on accelerating. I can go extremely slow, providing I'm accelerating. You can go very slow as long as you're accelerating the rod. So what loads the rod is acceleration. It's moving the rod tip faster than the line. What unloads the rod is stopping the rod. And that's another key thing a lot of people miss is their stop point. They continue the rod too far back, over rotation. You got to make sure when you accelerate that you also stop, and that allows the rod to unload the line back. And that's why as you get better, you can slow your acceleration down. As long as you have a good positive stop, the line will float back for you. You don't want to have to force your cast. Now, so that's your lift, and that is your sweep, is bringing that rod down level. Now if I did a sustained anchor cast, I don't need to do a lift at this point. All I need to do is keep the rod level and track it back. It's very important in fly casting, in especially spay casting, that your rod remains level going back. If I set my anchor and I track in an upward angle, I'm going to throw my D-loop up in the air, and you see how the anchor came out of the water? That's not good. You don't want to get your anchor out of the water. Very common mistake, or the rod's coming up too high. People are thinking about overhead casting instead of spay casting. A spay cast, the rod should stay level and then lift to go forward. Level and then lift. If I go back again steep, you can see it pulls the anchor. And if I do the opposite of that, if I come back and I drop the rod tip, I'm going to throw my D-loop into the water. So the rod tip always goes low to high. Low to high. Very important. Low to high. Every cast we do. So if I do a double spay, the rod's going to go low to high and out.